that brings us to our soul connection. And just like last week, we had our president of Solle Naturals and founder come talk to us about SolleFIT GP. And last week we talked about the grains of paradise and also the rooibos, which is one of the adaptogens. And so tonight I've asked him to give us some more. Specifically, I asked him to share about how SolleFIT GP can fit into this kind of metabolic and liver health conversation.
Happy to do that, Erica, and thanks for all the great information. Always puts me in deep thought. And I have to give a little shout out too, because you mentioned some really good supplements. And I love the fact that you said that, you know, you prefer to get a little bit in you every day of some of those liver protecting and liver enhancing and liver healing supplements. I am 100% behind that myself. I would much rather do a little bit every single day than to have to really, really ramp up, even though you can do that as well. If you find yourself in a really tough situation, there is hope. And it's so interesting. I got back from Mexico over the weekend. We were in a couple of cities down there. And always whenever I'm talking about the different soul formulas, even though I'm not a mentor, I'm not someone that sits with people, I'm just usually sharing why we have what is in our formulas and why they're put together the way they are, what our philosophy is. So I'll always have a few people come up after and go, my mother has this situation, what do you recommend? But when you look at liver, and someone came up with a 22-year-old son with fairly advanced fatty liver. So it's true what you say. And this is in Mexico. It's not just here in the United States. I agree with you. I think it's getting and going to get even more and more prevalent. But it's something that can be really, really well dealt with if we'll just sort of commit to it and kind of rewatch and think about this presentation you've given us today. So a quick shout out to some very special liver strengthening formulas at Solle. You mentioned omegas, Solle Megas, putting the right fats. It just turns out that one of the great answers is one of the simplest. Put really good fats. In other words, more fats to get rid of fatty liver, more fats. The opposite of what your intuition might be, but they're the good fats. But yeah, Solle Megas, that we even have a food. It's a very dense therapeutic food, Infatuate. It's all about the good fats that you listed. I'll mention one that maybe isn't on the top of people's list, but it can go onto Erica's list, Longevity. It actually has some very special liver. And I cannot also leave behind the deep clarifying, the deep, very thorough, the Sanskrit name. It's the only product of Solle that has a Sanskrit word in it, Amitox. Amit is a Sanskrit word. And that one has 2 or 3 really amazing liver changers. So shout out to those. But back to GP. I want to tell you there are at least 4 herbs in SolleFIT GP that are directly for your liver. And I would say a top 2 reason, or a bare minimum top 3 reason for their inclusion in the formula was the liver. So they're like 4. And then there's a couple more that are indirect, but they're just as, just as vital, just as crucial to the formula. And like you said last week, Erica, we talked a little bit about the grains of paradise. So this is just a quick little reminder. Remember, there were 2 different studies in the brief. I mean, it's so understudied. It's not underused. There's not any lack of history really changing people's health, but there is a lack of some of the study that we're used to here in the West. And so you've just got a couple of things showing really strong protective activity for your liver by grains of paradise. So a little review, we mentioned them last week, but there were 2, and the evidence of that is the sharp increase in one of the body's most important antioxidants, glutathione, going up with grains of paradise in a situation where a liver is exposed to radiation. And I like to bring that up because there are a lot of ways we're exposed to various types of radio waves. And we very confidently talk about why we need all this technology, and it's amazing. But nobody can tell you long-term what it does because it hasn't been around long enough. But it is not to me coincidental that some of these situations that Eric has talked about are building over time and parallel some of that. And so I'm not saying that it's the whole reason, but what I am saying is that there is a correlation there, in my opinion. So even the grains of paradise, that first ingredient we talked about last week, is absolutely a big deal for your liver. And if you have some liver issues, yes, it can actually pretty quickly send your body into a cleanse mode or a fix mode that can be, it can take you through some stages there. But it is to a good end. The next ingredient is apple cider vinegar. And apple cider vinegar does lots of good things all throughout the gut, lots of good things for our immunity, lots of good things to do with blood sugar. And as Erica talked about, the liver is involved in that too, in terms of storage. And so anything and everything that we can do that makes us more efficient there, not only is it going to help the pancreas, but it actually is going to directly help the liver. What apple cider vinegar, some studies show, and this is what Dr. Allison shared with us, and just improve our sensitivity, the cell's sensitivity to the insulin, which helps have that process happen the way it should happen and balance it. So apple cider vinegar is a big one, just briefly. I happen to believe that ashwagandha, another key ingredient in SolleFIT GP, I guess it's one, it probably, if you look enough, it probably has some liver studies that show direct benefit. But I like to think of it in our formulation, it was indirect, because I am fascinated by any study, including the Chinese philosophy, that looks at how emotions line up with various health processes, and specifically to some of the organs. And liver is one where clearly, if we can have a better response to stresses, particularly with anger, we see whatever those roles are to do with those emotional chemicals. Maybe Erica could tell us about them. This is not something I'm an expert in, except to the degree to know that when we put our stress management in a better situation, which we can do with nutrition, we can help ourselves, I'll say it that way, greatly with nutrition and make it possible, then we actually do see a change in strength and in the liver's ability to detoxify, keep itself functioning the way it could. So ashwagandha, to me, perhaps a direct, but I look at it indirectly. Now, the next one is a member of the mint family. Coleus forscola is another ingredient in SolleFIT GP. And yes, it's a member of the mint family, but also its studies are directly related to how our body metabolizes fats, and particularly some of the enzymes that are involved there. And what science knows now is that this therapeutic mint relative actually does modulate those enzymes and their expression in improving our fat metabolism. So you can find a lot of different extracts of this coleus at different levels of these components that affect the enzymes. And so we actually do have a standardized extract of that one to those two studied levels in the SolleFIT GP, directly helping the liver. Nopal cactus, I would call that one indirect, but maybe it's such an amazing adaptogen. It probably has some direct studies. It excels in the way our body handles blood sugar and levels of sugars and how and sugar storage. But there are plenty of studies that I think were focused on the heart that end up relating to fats in the blood, and also other issues that directly tie to the liver and metabolic syndrome. So nopal, even though we talk about it for something else, it's a strong component for liver health, again, in this formula. There is a probiotic in SolleFIT GP. Just reminding us all, there is the German named probiotic, which is heat resistant, does not need to be refrigerated. It's the PF, the Freudenreichii. And one of the things that that probiotic strain is known to do is to create, to manufacture, to use that term, short chain fatty acids, CLA, conjugated linoleic acid, and these wonderful nutrients that are important in the process we're talking about today. So I wanted to mention all those. Now, the last two were part of Dr. Allison's presentation, that are the final two ingredients in SolleFIT GP, are a little more direct, and they're red beets, specifically red beetroot, right? And rooibos, a red South African bush. Both of these two, it is interesting to me in this lift product. And actually, there's actually three more ingredients, but Erica mentioned yerba mate already. Yerba mate is a big part of this formula. She covered that already. But it is interesting that you have these reds in our SolleFIT GP that are direct liver strengtheners in a very, very strong way. There's all sorts of evidence that show that bile flow, bile that our liver produces, that's so important and obviously essential to the metabolism of fats, but also to detoxification. Those two keys, big, huge, giant keys to metabolic mastery. Beets are superstars in helping. If we find a way to bring beets into our diet, we can really change that. We can change any liver condition, I believe anyway, from where it is to a better condition. And so the red beets, we actually have them in two forms, because one of them is sort of the whole beet, because we want all of that glutathione production. Two of our body's very most famous anyway detoxifiers, glutathione and then SOD, superoxide dismutase, are both produced by beetroot. And then bile itself, we talk a lot about maintaining a clean and a beautiful red liver, and not a fatty liver, because we can detox. And when I read that and when I think about that, I think of emotions. So I think of both of those things, detoxing, because it is all biochemical at this point, and what the liver is dealing with. And so beets are kind of like that beautiful double whammy, double benefit. They are shown to actually increase bile. I mentioned bile flow, but also blockages between the liver. And that's another interesting study. In fact, that study, I believe rooibos showed as well, so that the bile can flow to the gallbladder, where it concentrates to greater levels and just basically is more effective for us, more efficient, more leveraged. But also our lymph. Red beets also move lymph, which is essential to maintaining clarity. All our yellow products at Solle are all about removing blockages. If we can do that, then everything can function better. So red beets, even though this is a red label product, there's a lot of yellow function in red beets. And I need to add finally that the reason we have two different forms of the beets in here is because you have all this liver health, and you also have the concentrate of beet nutrients that improve oxygen flow, clearer thinking, stronger cells, and greater energy levels in cells. So everything they need to perform, they need energy to perform. Beets are right there on the front line with that. And they do other things too. They're super rich in B vitamins and in calcium and in iron and lots of great things. So the last one that I've kind of already mentioned is rooibos. Rooibos is a fermented, so this particular material is fermented from the bush. And actually, years ago, Dr. Allison pointed out this was looked down upon, and now the absolute opposite by science. They're seeing that many of these fermented naturals actually do better. And rooibos is one of them, or meaning the body actually is able to leverage them even better. One of the things that rooibos is so good at is ramping up this wonderful glutathione that our liver produces. And in fact, one of the studies she talked about was doubling it. It was a certain amount and it was large amounts. Now we have a concentrated rooibos. I don't think our concentrated amount would be equal to that study amount, but it's a very good amount. And we're about the philosophy of do this every day instead of just one time, do a bunch and I'm going to double this for my liver. I'm just going to double my liver's position. Just strengthen it every day by a good chunk. The final thing that rooibos was so, one of the studies that I think this is another one Dr. Allison shared was cortisol. And Eric has talked about this in the past. It flat out lowers. We have way too much in general, way too much in the system. With rooibos, body won't produce as much. And so lots of great benefits for these that are complementary, but a lot of them are pretty directly to the liver. So GP's it's a direct player in liver nutrition.
I love that. It's funny because, the formula hasn't been out that long, guys. And every time I look at it, I'm like, wow, this has so much good stuff in it. It's really good. I think it's it's definitely a great product to move energy through the liver, I will tell you. So I love GP for that as well. Helps to move a lot of that stuff out of the way, but there is an end to that, right? And so if you have a congested liver as well, you might experience some physical things, right? I know one of the big things that I hear all the time from people when they first start is a couple of things. There's it makes them go to the bathroom a lot more, right? Well, you got to get all of that stuff out, right? We got to flush out, especially liver toxins are often going to look like, more bowel movements, right? Because we got to push those things out of the body. And so those are some things that that I've heard a lot about GP. But what I know is the formula just blows me away. And the results people get.